Guys, state of emergency. I live above a bookstore. Don't even get me started. And every fortnight, I am simply unable to resist the orgasmic aroma of fresh pages. So I go in, buy 4 books, but that's neither here nor there. My bookstore has a little arts and crafts corner because it knows that its main demographic of clientele are anxiety-ridden fruits. And I saw a punch needle embroidery kit, which I of course purchased immediately, despite having literally 0 prior experience with punch needle embroidery. And because I'm an idiot, I'm thinking, I know how to sew. I've done embroidery before. This is gonna be the easiest thing to do. I'm like tracing with a hint of danger. Sign me up. What I didn't realize upon truly so many things was that as you're punching, you're just making those little loops on the other side that can truly come undone and pop through at any time, undoing so much work. So I'm going back and retracing my steps, sweating like a stuck pig trying to do this allegedly relaxing activity. It looks so fucking ugly, like it's disgraceful. Sorry that this has nothing to do with the video, but I'm reaching out with purely desperate hope that some of you guys do this as a hobby and have some tips to preserve my sanity. I want to be a crafty pansexual so badly, but I am only the latter. I have no subgenre of pansexuality. I'm just a useless girl. First off, I just want to say thank you so much for all the love on my first episode of my Decades of Doom series. It's so surprising, overwhelming, all of the things. I've been having a blast reading your guys' comments, and yeah, I'm just so tickled and jazzed that you guys are here and excited to get in on the conversation. The YouTube algorithm is far from perfect, but it did its duty in drawing in you freaks who are thirsty for that horror knowledge. I'm still working on the 1900s video for my second installation of Decades of Doom, but I obviously, given the title of this video, have other things that I want to talk about and explore within the horror genre. So please be gentle with me. Gently! She's cooking. She's incubating. She'll be here soon. While I love horror, feel like that's why we've all gathered here today, I'm certainly not a lover of all horror. Not all horror is created equal. Some people think it's just this homogenous mixture of stabbings and ghosts, but I'm here to sit down in my dumb little chair and tell you today something that truly no one else has had the gusto to say before. It's not just that. Sometimes men ruin things. Now, before people start putting shields on their testicles, no, I don't hate all men. No, I don't think men ruined the horror genre. In fact, there are so many men that I admire within horror that I don't even know where to start. Actually, yes, I do. I made a list. Stephen King, Jordan Peele, Jack Ketchum, foreshadowing, Bruce Campbell, Wes Craven, just to name a few. So now that I've thoroughly thrown my pussy to the wind at these respectable gents, let me actually say what I want to say. Some horror is bad. Some horror is offensive. Some horror is a perverted fantasy that would and should be frowned upon and critiqued, only it claims to be immune from such criticism because it was actually an experimental exploration and critique on art and limits. I couldn't not read that off the script, actually. It's a long line. That is the majority of these films that I'm about to list to you today. We will get deeper into it, don't worry. Within the horror genre, I consider myself to have pretty thick skin. In fact, I absolutely love gore and slashers. We don't need to get into all that at this moment in time as to why that may be. I'm not going to kill anyone, if that wasn't obvious by the every cell of my being that sits in front of you now. But this is all to say that your girlie can handle herself in front of a screen, okay? Back in the days of yore, when I would Google what horror movies I should watch, I used to Google, and this isn't great. Goriest horror films of all time. Most fucked up horror movies of all time. Horror movies that I will never, ever watch again. Spoiler alert. I found them. I will say I don't Google that kind of stuff anymore. I think I've watched most of them. But after thinking myself immune for a good number of years, I can now positively say that I have found my fucking limit. I found the border. I am, in fact, building that wall. I may be all jokes at the moment, but I am not kidding when I say that these movies actually traumatize me in various degrees, and with a possible exception to literally one of the films that I'm going to talk about today. These are the horror movies that I watched because I hated myself and will truly never ever watch them ever again. Today, I'm going to be listing those movies out, giving them a brief plot summary without triggering myself, and diving into specifically why I think that movie is bad, and in this case, unwatchable or unrewatchable, because the darkness overtook me and I was unable to resist. It won't be like an official ranking per se, but I will be starting with the one that I personally find to be the least offensive and ending with the one that I truly think is fiery trash. Also, spoilers, kinda? I'm not gonna get into the nitty-gritty of the scenes, but I might bring up plot points within the narrative that are gonna be potentially revealing as to what happens in the movie. Also, disclaimer, of course, because how can I not drop like 3 in my videos? These movies are supremely fucked up. Like, every single one has earned a velvet seat in hell. And while I obviously can't tell you not to watch something, that case being because, I watched all of these, I can at the very least strongly advise against it if you haven't watched any of these yet. But if you're a sicko like I was at 19 and unable to resist, I'm just gonna have to say, make some tea and be there for yourself. Sit next to a friendly stuffed animal. Call your mom. Truly do whatever it takes to make yourself feel safe, because these movies made me and many other people feel incredibly unsafe. Also, trigger warnings left and right from these movies. If you want to do a fun little mental exercise, think of a trigger. Could be any trigger, most random trigger. It's there. It is there in the movie actively exploited within the movie. So without further ado, let's dive into these terrifying monsters disguised as cinema. This is obviously all based on my opinion. I, did do research while putting together this video. If you are out there and you like any of these movies, no hate. But seriously, we are all entitled to our opinions. I would actually be very interested if you like any of these movies, respectfully explaining why in the comments. I love a good, kind-spirited, artistic debate. This is just my opinion. It means literally nothing. This is just something that I've always been really interested in, and a video that I've been wanting to make for a number of years, and have now been thoroughly traumatized and hardened enough to be able to dive in with my field experience, if you will. So just want to make that abundantly clear. This is, again, all in good fun, friendly discussion. Now we can get into it. So I want to cover my academic bases, so to speak, with a term that I'm not sure if I made up or not. I definitely don't think I did. It just felt fitting to justify the amount of fucking tangents I go on when making these videos. You will notice a common thread in each of these films as to why I personally despise them, and why I will truly never allow them to disgrace my eyes ever again. And that is that They are actively fucking you up and making you wish that everything in life isn't real. But they're also hiding behind this mirage of reason that I have decided to term, for the sake of this video, as intentional violence. I'm not coining the term. It's definitely a thing. There are tons of articles and op-eds exploring this cultural phenomenon. The LA Times has a really interesting article on the culture of violence that I will link down below in the description. Essentially, in these movies, if we're to like play devil's advocate, the violence in these films is seemingly intended to, in addition to deeply upset us, prove a point or make a statement. Which one could argue all films that have violent scenes in them do this, but these films are like that on crack. They're the candy flippers of college, okay? They are the weird guys in the dorm that keep wanting you to buy their weed. These movies exist, in my opinion, for the sole purpose being to be violent and to violate the characters in the film, the audience's mind, basically make you feel as close to the violence as possible, to make you feel almost as if you're witnessing it in real time, or in some of the more extreme cases, actually experiencing it yourself. These movies aren't providing escapism. In fact, it feels like they actively want to trap you and drive home this point that violence like this actually exists in our world, or potentially could. And it's our responsibility as a society to be aware so that we can learn and understand how to stop it from ever happening. So they allegedly may or may not be saying. But as you're watching these films, and again, don't do that, you truly can't help but wonder if the people who okayed and the people who made these movies, like, want to see the violence that's taking place on the screen. I'm totally just spitballing. I am not making any allegations whatsoever. It's just a thought, but like, I feel like you can't help but wonder as you're watching these movies, because they're truly so terribly brutal. Why would they want us to see something like that? To educate us? Maybe. But maybe it's because they also want to see something like that, but have to provide a form of justification. So, art. I feel like this point will sound, hopefully, a lot less accusatory and make more sense as we get into the movies. But keep these little thoughts in your big brains, okay? Because as I start listing these movies out, I'm hoping it'll start to come together as I'm explaining. Or maybe my argument is super shitty. Who knows? Anyway, The Girl Next Door. This is probably the only movie out of all of these fucking insane freaks that I feel like is the closest to actually saying something. Not that it does, because it's very clear that it's trying to say something. Whether or not it hits its mark is another matter. This movie is also the only one that I feel like is exempt from some of these critiques I listed prior, because it's more outwardly condemning of the violence that occurs. Also, again, I'm reading the Letterboxd summary because I'm lazy, okay? In a quiet suburban town in the summer of 1958, two recently orphaned sisters are placed in the care of their mentally unstable Aunt Ruth. But Ruth's depraved sense of discipline will soon lead to unspeakable acts of abuse and torture that involve her young sons, the neighborhood children, and a 12-year-old boy whose life will be changed forever. So this movie is very unfortunately based on a true story. It's inspired, which feels like the wrong term to say, but it's the only one I can think of at the moment, by the Sylvia Likens case of the 1960s. I am absolutely not getting into the details of the Sylvia Likens case on here for obvious reasons. Essentially, she was a young girl who was tortured and eventually murdered by hell witch scumbag Gertrude Baniszewski. Gertrude Baniszewski's own children were also involved in the torture, as well as other children within the neighborhood. That part was not fictionalized. So yeah, it's basically as shitty as humanity can possibly get. What I think this movie does well, at least in comparison to the others, is on its face, it's actually not bad movie per se. The acting's well done, the pacing is pretty nail-biting, the violence in the scene work doesn't feel too sensationalized, at least again in comparison to the other ones on this list. It definitely feels like the makers want to force us to witness the violence as firsthand as we can without it feeling like they're, for lack of a better phrase, getting off on it. This film, I think, also effectively draws attention to the bystander effect, wanting to intervene but feeling powerless to do so. Don't get it twisted. I am not a David apologist. That fucker had every opportunity to stop what was going on in that house and didn't. But the intention is there, and I'm at least, willing to acknowledge what they're trying to do here. But the reason why I am never watching it again is because despite all of its potential strengths, it is a nearly impossible watch. I don't cry at movies, and when I do, it's to ones like 13 Going on 30 or Lilo and Stitch. Scenes of emotion just kind of like fall on deaf ears for me, despite how fucking sensitive I am in real life. This movie made me cry for such a long time. Not only seeing the physical deterioration of Meg as the movie progresses, but also being forced to witness her loss of spirit. She starts off as this cheery and bubbly character, and then by the end of the movie, you can feel her hopelessness, and it is so heavy. And then she dies. She's dead. Like, the bad guys win, to put it lightly. This movie will truly suck out your soul and any hope you have in humanity, and that is why it will never curse my screen again. Another thing I'll say is this movie is actually based on a book of the same name by Jack Ketchum, who is a very well-known splatterpunk writer. And while the book is absolutely controversial in its own right, I will say I loved the book. The book is one of my favorite quote-unquote horror books. There's a lot of criticism behind getting inspiration from something like this, as brutal as like a real life criminal case. But I personally can resonate with wanting to understand what drives someone to do something so evil. I mean, you look at true crime. It's a much smaller scale to an extent of what that means, but, it's the desire as humans to understand human behavior, even the most extreme kind. I have to give him that, because I'm not above that, Additionally, I really like the book's writing style. The pacing of the book is very impactful. We get way more interiority than we do in a movie, which, while doesn't justify while the characters do what they do, it at least explains it more. And another thing that I deeply respect, because Jack Ketchum is not afraid to dive into violence and detail it as much as possible, but there is a scene of violence in the book, one of the last ones. It is, in my opinion, the most upsetting scene. Jack Ketchum writes the beginning of it, sets it up, implies what is going to happen to Meg, and then cuts to after the violence has taken place. It makes the scene so powerful and heart-wrenching without shoving your face into the violence and playing it out scene by scene. That would have sensationalized it. But the way that he did it, I felt like was even more powerful and respectful. As someone who is a survivor to a much smaller extent, I had a lot of admiration for him doing that. I personally feel like Jack Ketchum was a writer who cared about whatever he was writing about, and cared about each specific instance that inspired his stories. There's a really good interview he does that I will link below if you want to check it out. It kind of helps you understand why someone would want to write something like this, something with so much violence. He's not a perfect person for sure. Like, you shouldn't prefer kids to be naked on the screen for the sake of authenticity. You know what I mean? Like, it's not great, not perfect. It doesn't need to be that accurate, Jack. The story is fictionalized because it has to be. Jack Ketchum is interpreting people's emotions and the internal turmoil of both the onlookers and the victims. Not to be that bitch who's like, read the book before you see the movie, but, you know, read the book and don't watch the movie. At least, if you want to explore this story further, read the book because it just has so much more to offer. Hello. You are a beautiful girl. I'm leaving for Ireland tomorrow. My partner and I have been planning this trip. She only does this when it's recording. I think she wants you guys to secretly think she's an affectionate she heard that I said once that she's not a lap cat, and she was like, I'll fucking make a fool out of you, bitch. My partner and I have been planning a trip to Ireland and Scotland for quite some time, and we're leaving tomorrow, and I am leaving her at my aunt's, who's very kindly watching her for the 10 days that I will be out of the country. I am gonna miss her so much. I was supposed to drop her off tonight, and I literally started crying and couldn't, and now have to do it tomorrow. So anyway, back to the fucking torture. Jack Ketchum ended up dying of cancer in 2018, and whether you like the type of writing he does or not, he left behind a legacy of splatterpunk and horror that writers within the genre aspire to, myself included. Stephen King has spoken very highly of him. That is one of Stephen King's opinions that I personally agree with. I think he's a great example, most of the time, of portraying heavy and intense violence, but in a way that has intentionality behind it. Like, he's writing from a place of warning rather than exploitation and enjoyment. And while I think the movie tries to do this as well, it's just inevitably not as effective and still team too much, which is why I will never watch it ever again. Any of the I Spit on Your Grave remakes. Some of you may be like, whoa, Ellie, I Spit on Your Grave? But it's a classic horror movie. And most of you are probably like, yep, nope, that makes sense. That was fucking brutal. The I Spit on Your Grave franchise is essentially all horror and revenge stories. Yeah. The first one was made in 1978, which I admittedly have not seen. I made the mistake of watching the first two remakes before, and now I do not want to expose myself to even more destruction in the remakes, at least the first two remakes, because I stopped watching after the second one. Just could not take that subject matter any longer. Our final girl in these movies is R-worded, tortured, left for dead, survives, and then goes on a revenge spree on each of her attackers, kind of Saw style. There are some things the movies try to do that have the potential to say something, like showing corruption within the government and how it truly does nothing to protect women. Yeah. Sorry, it's just, I'm about to say it, and I just disagree with it so aggressively that it's like my body is literally stopping me. Potentially empowering survivors of R. Like, that's the premise, you know? She survives and she gets revenge. I just, oh God, it just feels so icky in my mouth. Because it mostly just focuses on showing us the brutal R's for way too long, and then the revenge takedown of each arpist. These two Letterboxd reviews are about the 2010 remake, but honestly summarize my thoughts perfectly for both remakes. It genuinely feels like the makers wanted to show a brutal R scene and then go, no, we love women. Wasn't that so horrible? Now look at the bad men get ripped to pieces. Feminism! Both are disgusting. One doesn't justify the other in any sense. It literally feels like illegal revenge porn. Like, you can't help but feel like, as you're watching this, that someone who made this movie because they wanted to watch something like this, particularly the second remake. Another Letterboxd review that captures my thoughts perfectly. I was sick to my stomach watching all of the second movie. Everything is brutal. Nothing has meaning beyond wanting you to show that brutality. And both are directed by men, of course. Love that! Don't watch these. Don't give these men your money. Just take my word for it. Buy a pizza instead. Pizzas are nice. If you are looking for a movie that does this storyline effectively, weird thing to say, I highly recommend 2017's Revenge. First off, directed by feminist horror queen Coralie Farge. Sorry! I love her though. Love you, girl. The difference in approach to these two pretty similar storylines, absolutely striking. The R scene is still hard to watch, but it is done with care and acknowledgement of the brutality in taking away someone's choice. It subverts our expectations expertly by making us first think that Jen, our final girl, is this super hot ditzy girl who's young and sleeping with a married man. And then she turns into a fucking badass. There's not much dialogue. It's action-packed. Bloody, but in a way that I think is impactful and satisfying. And you get to see shitty men go down. Watch that instead if you're itching for that specific storyline. Support women. Feminism. We love you, Hot Sniper Jen. Trauma. Oh my god, I hated this movie so much. Here's a question. Why do we still film our scenes with practically no cuts like we're trying to be documentarians? It's not educational, let me tell you. So why do it? Why? We know why. In Trauma, 4 friends visit a rural locality of Chile, are brutally attacked by a man and his son. That sentence doesn't make sense. 4 friends who visit a rural locality of Chile are brutally attacked by a man and his son. After not finding help in the town, they decide to confront these men with the help of a pair of policemen. But in this way, they will discover that their attackers have in their blood a direct legacy to the darkest period of Chilean history and will have to face the most brutal enemy. This movie hides behind a lot to try and justify why it is the way that it is. It's like, oh, we're trying to acknowledge the dark history of our country. We're trying to show how generational trauma gets passed down and the effects it has. We're giving examples on how violence creates more violence. It's a story of warning and survival. No, babe, it's not. You just wanted to be able to show a group of women getting their trip ruined by getting attacked and hunted down one by one. The arguments this movie tries to make are just so weak and transparent that it leaves you angry at the people who made this movie and okayed this movie being made, not the Chilean history that it's trying to allude to. It totally misses the mark here, or at the very least is unable to convince you with its possibly made up mark. So for some historical context, for us to understand what exactly the movie is alluding to, because I didn't know, and you certainly don't learn from watching the movie. The movie is referencing PTSD and making a critique about the state-sponsored torture that many Chileans faced under a U.S.-backed military coup led by General Augusto Pinochet, who was in fact a fucking monster. But we loved him, apparently. It's just crazy how decades can go by and our country's sense of morality and overall mentality simply just do not change. And the things this monster enforced emotionally impacted the people of Chile for decades, even after the end of his dictatorship in 1990. And this movie is a horribly shitty representation of how trauma stays with you and follows you everywhere. And it wants to show you this by forcing you to watch multiple women get R-worded and murdered. Because that's trauma, baby! That's how she rolls. Can you also guess the gender of this director? A cis man. Yes! 5,000 points to Slytherin. Don't watch this movie. It's not doing what it says it's doing. It's not giving. And it's just gonna leave you feeling nauseated and totally disturbed. Megan is missing. I'm starting to get, mad and upset, guys. I thought it would be cathartic in a way to dive into why these movies are so bad, give an academic reasoning behind my bad feelings, but I'm just getting super tired and down. I feel a depression nap coming. Okay, this fucking guy. 14-year-old Megan and her best friend Amy spend a lot of time on the internet, posting videos of themselves and chatting with guys online. One night, Megan chats with a guy named Josh who convinces her to meet him for a date. The next day, Megan is missing forever, based on actual cases of child abduction. This movie genuinely makes me so angry because we are now dealing with minors. The director, and I'll say his name, Michael Goy, says this movie was made as an educational cautionary tale about the dangers of online chatting and meetups with strangers. And Michael Goy said, "I'm gonna fight the good fight against exploitation by exploiting, by showing the violence committed against these children as firsthand as possible. To show how bad it is." Disgusting. Letterboxd user Herb Gallo has the most popular review of this movie on the site, and honestly, they also summarize my thoughts perfectly. I'll link the film on Letterboxd below just so you can see the review if you want, as it is a little bit long. For how blatantly careless this film was in its approach to child abduction and online grooming, it certainly made room for effort and focus on other things, like hiring actresses who scarily look like young children and showing underage sexuality as much as possible. No hate to either of the main actresses. I'm sure they were sold a pitch about how this movie was going to ultimately bring awareness around this topic. One of them, I can't remember now, had just turned 18, which I don't love. And so clearly, how are you going to know to differentiate shitty movies from impactful ones at 18 when you're trying to get your big break, Even that feels exploitative. God. This movie has nothing going for it. I hate the manipulative messaging of the director. The whole thing feels so slimy and gross. There are images and scenes in this movie that I still think about, at least once a month, and not in a good way. And it's been over 6 years since I first saw the movie. I genuinely wish I could heed everyone's warnings about how horrendous it is and truly burn it from my brain, because that is how traumatizing and horrendous it is. Manipulation and misleading messaging all wrapped together in a pervy bow. Don't watch this movie. Don't give Michael Goy acknowledgement. This movie is probably the worst thing I have ever seen in my life. A Serbian film. And now, here we are. The big kahuna. The white whale. If you're in the horror world and haven't seen this movie, first of all, God bless you. You've probably heard of it. Retired porn star Milos leads a normal family life trying to make ends meet. Presented with the opportunity of a lifetime to financially support his family for the rest of their lives, Milos must participate in one last mysterious film. From then on, Milos is drawn into a maelstrom of unbelievable cruelty and mayhem. I alluded to this film briefly in my Decades of Doom video. Feel free to watch that if you haven't yet. Wildly different from this video. And in that video, I talk about horror movies from the 1890s and how they paved the way for horror films to come and film in general, and impacted the culture and dove into societal anxieties. And this film wants to be that so badly. It's literally brown-nosing relevancy so aggressively that it almost makes you focus on that rather than how truly disgusting it is. If this movie were a person, it would be that weird guy running around with a chainsaw and screaming, "Legalize comedy!" I can't remember his name. If this movie were a rightfully canceled comedian, it would say, "Oh, you thought it was offensive? You didn't get it, babe. Chill." Serbian film shocks, violates, and disgusts you, and then almost seems to shame and accuse you of missing the point when you walk away thinking, hey, That movie? That was a bad movie. Discussing the controversies and limitations of art is interesting. Exploring the life of a male sex worker, a perspective we don't often get, is interesting. Diving into a world where the lines of creative expression and societal ethics are tested is interesting. This movie doesn't do any of that, but it thinks it does. It shits all over your screen and then goes, I did that. Here are some wonderfully accurate Letterboxd reviews that are all true and inarguably correct. I hope that guy did in fact find new friends. And the sad truth is that this movie kind of wins in a way. Like, people are still talking about it. I'm including it in a YouTube video I'm making where at least 90 of you will see it. Love you, freaks, but don't watch this one. Give her a skip, a thumbs down. Don't give it a thumbs down, actually, because that would mean interacting with it. Pretend this movie doesn't exist. Though not the attention the director might have been after, it's definitely getting buzz. It's included in practically every most disturbing horror movies list on the internet. So all I can really say is, don't watch it! Okay, I need to eat some trail mix and lay down. This was tough, guys. I'll be honest. Obviously, I ultimately enjoyed it. It was actually kind of cathartic to give these movies a final fuck you before I truly try to erase them from my psyche by watching anime and Scooby-Doo. I think it's, it's every creator who, rates movies of any kind, and those movies have a significant amount of controversy attached to them. It's hard finding the line of like giving them attention versus walking away and, making sure that they don't get any more publicity than they feel they're entitled to. But I also think these discussions are important. As someone who is, writing a novel that does have scenes of violence in it, scenes of non-consensual instances, I think it is really important to understand where your intentionality is coming from when you're writing those scenes. Are you writing them genuinely with care and compassion for the survivors, or are you just wanting to put that on a screen but know that it's rightfully so frowned upon, and so you hide behind an argument that's valid for other forms of media but is not what your art is doing, if you can even call it that? So yeah, it's a really interesting debate and conversation, and I would be really interested to see what you guys think about violence in film and in literature. Instances where you have felt that it was effective, instances where you felt that it wasn't. I'd be very curious to know, because I, constantly want to learn about how to create with care, even if we are writing and talking about things that are, to put it lightly, difficult to absorb. As always, this video was super fun to make. Was it? I love admitting that when I was 19, I was deeply mentally unwell, and further exasperated that by exposing myself to these cinematic dumpster fires. Thank you so much for watching this wild ride. And if you liked this video, show me how much. Give it a like, a comment, subscribe. Let me know what you would add to your list of unwatchable horror movies, unless you don't have one and live a happy, fulfilling life. No hate. I appreciate you all very, very much, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.